Hi, I'm Sarah from Night Owl Quilts, writer of the Blooming Bowl Cozy pattern. In this video, I'll be sewing a medium-sized bowl cozy from start to finish. After printing your pattern, I like to use a Crayola washable marker to trace the pattern onto the fabric. I'm using these cute spring prints from Pioneer Woman. Make sure whatever fabric you choose is 100% cotton so it will be microwavable. First, you will want to take your fabric for the bottom or the back of the cozy and sew the 6 darts. The darts are the little V-shaped cutouts that form the petals. To sew the darts, fold the fabric right sides together to line up the 2 adjoining petals. Sew a 1/4 inch seam, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of your seam. Keep the seam straight and sew right off the edge of the fabric at the bottom of the seam. You can see my 1/4 inch seam here and have sewn all the way down off the edge of the fabric and still backstitch at the beginning and the end. These 6 darts will shape the fabric into our bowl shape. Make sure that you're using 100% cotton thread. I like to use Gutermann or Coates & Clark. Just make sure that you look at the labels because those brands also sell polyester thread. The reason that we want to use all 100% cotton materials is that any polyester will melt in the microwave. Please never microwave your bowl cozy for more than 2-minute intervals and never leave your microwave unattended while it's in use. Alright, this is my last dart for the bottom fabric. After you get your last dart sewn, pop it open and smooth down the bottom, and this is what it should look like after sewing all 6 darts. Now you can go ahead and set that to the side. Now this is the batting that I prefer to use, called Wrap and Zap by Pellon. This 1-yard package can make about 12 bowl cozies. I go ahead and cut that down to the size of the top of my bowl cozy fabric. Now you're going to see me fold and iron creases into the fabric for the top of the bowl cozy. I use these creases as guides for the quilting in the next step. If you would like to quilt your bowl cozy with the straight lines going across as seen in the pictures on the pattern, then this is the method that I use to do that. Please use any quilting method that you would like or that you're most comfortable with to quilt your bowl cozy. You could use straight line quilting, echo quilting, or free motion quilting. Once you've figured out how you want to quilt your fabric, smooth it down onto your batting. I've found that I don't need to baste or pin my pieces together. Since they're both made of cotton and they're so small, they tend to stick together. But feel free to pin or baste if that makes you more comfortable. I don't even find that I need to use my walking foot on my machine. But again, do whatever feels most comfortable for you. I start by sewing my straight line across onto the ironed guidelines, and then I just use the edge of my 1/4 inch foot to sew the line next to it. I echo the lines until I have 5 lines going across for the medium size. On my small size bowl cozies, I do 3 lines across, and on the large size bowl cozies, I like to do 7 lines across. I do lengthen my stitch length to about a 2.2 so that the quilting stands out a little bit more. After I finish those first 5 lines, I move over to the next 5. You just keep following those ironed guidelines. As you can see, I've made so many of these that I don't cut my thread at the end of every line anymore. I just do a few little stitches in my batting that I'll cut off later, and it saves me thread and it saves me time. All right, this is my last line of quilting, and then I'm going to trim my batting right up to the edge of the fabric. You'll want to trim the batting from the darts as well. I like to use large, sharp scissors for this part, as that cotton batting can be tricky to cut sometimes. You can really see the quilting from the back there. Next, we're going to sew the darts. I like to use my finger to make sure that the fabric stays lined up with the batting while I sew. Once again, you want to fold those right sides together and use a 1/4 inch inseam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end of each of your seams. And you're going to want to repeat this for all 6 darts around. Now that you have all of the darts sewn, it should look like this. Now grab your bottom fabric and place it inside of your top fabric, right sides together, lining up the petals. We're now going to sew the top and bottom pieces together. Make sure to open both of the seams at the dart. I just open them up one at a time. So this is the seam that I'm going to start on. I like to start about a 1/2 inch before the first darts. So it's kind of hard to see, but I'm starting my seam a 1/2 inch before the dart seams. I'm still using that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I have shortened my stitch length back up to about a 1.8. I like to sew until my needle is right in the middle of that seam, the dart seam, and then I go ahead and I move to the next dart seam and I open up those seam allowances, and then I hold that with my finger while I sew the arch of the petal. It's really helpful to have a machine that you can set for needle down. So see, I have my machine stop in the needle down position right here on that dart seam. And I raise my foot and I twist my fabric just a bit, lower my foot, and then I go ahead and move to the next dart seam and I open up those seams. It really is best to take the time to open these seam allowances so that you don't have so much bulk when you're turning it. It was a little tricky to do this one-handed. And then one more time, you stop right on that seam, raise the foot, put my phone back in its stand so you guys can see it with two hands. I pivot my fabric just a little bit, and then I go ahead and open that seam allowance of the next dart in line. Then once that bottom one opened up, the top one opened up, and then it's real easy to line up the two petals, the top and the bottom fabric there, and then just sew right along the top edge of that petal. And I'm going to go ahead and do this almost all the way around. When you get to your last dart seam, I'm going to show you how I judge what size of hole to leave for turning. All right, this is my last petal. Here's where I started over here. Now I like to leave about a 2-inch gap for turning. So my 2 fingers measure about 2 inches, so you can use 2 fingers or 2 inches. I eyeball it, especially if there's a nice print to my pattern. I hold my 2 fingers there, stick a little pin, just so I don't forget to stop, and then finish up that seam, making sure to backstitch at the end so that we don't pop that seam open when we're turning it. Now here's what your bowl cozy should look like. All those seams are sewn open. You're gonna reach inside and carefully turn it right side out. Once you get all the fabric pulled through, I like to take my finger on the inside, or you could use a chopstick or a bodkin, and I run my finger around the seam all the way around the entire bowl cozy to make sure that all those petals have turned out. Now see, I'm forming my bowl cozy a little bit here. And I go around and I make sure I get all of those seams as flat as possible. And then here at the opening, I roll in the edges and I try to do it just that 1/4 of an inch. Sometimes they like to obey better than others. Now I don't whip that closed. I'll show you how we get that closed at the end. I start at the first start. I do a back stitch, always making sure that that fabric is totally turned, and I'm going to sew all the way around the edges. I've turned my stitch length back up to about a 2.2 millimeter stitch length, and I'm still using a 1/4 of an inch inseam. As you see on this part, I like to stop at every one of those darts and just make sure that everything is lining up properly. Now when we get to this last petal, sometimes those little edges like to flip out on you. So I make sure everything is tucked in. I bring my little stiletto in and get all the little frayed edges and any of the threads from the quilting and make sure it's all tucked in. And then to close up this last petal, you have the option of doing what I like to do, which is I move from a 1/4 inch inseam to an 1/8 of an inch, and I sew really close to that edge to catch the hole and make sure I get it nice and closed without any of those turned under edges sticking out. You could also continue doing the 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edge and then go back and hand sew the opening closed. At the end there, I like to back stitch, and then I trim off any little tails of thread from my top stitching. And as you can see there, you can barely tell the difference between my 1/8 of an inch seam and my 1/4 of an inch seam, but it sure saves a whole lot of time not having to hand stitch anything. I'm just going to take a minute to kind of shape my bowl, and here is your finished product. Thank you so much for purchasing my Blooming Bowl Cozy pattern. And again, this is Sarah from Night Owl Quilts. You can find me on Etsy, where I have other patterns for sale, as well as finished products. You can buy these exact bowl cozies in my shop right now. Be sure to also follow me, Night Owl Quilts, on Instagram. Happy sewing!